Was that not a beautiful gift, that musicality that Vernon Chatlein just offered us? As you can see, I will not be doing this presentation alone. I will be accompanied. For in the end, being is always being with others. There's always a sociality, a larger thing that we are part of. Just like now, I'm making this take in nature with the rest of the world as part of this. So I would like to say, Moro bon dia, good morning, goeiemorgen, bonjour, buenos dias, and so forth. All of these ways of talking, all of these ethics, or all of these contain an ethics, I should say. Whenever Caribbean people say good morning, there's an ethics in that. And they say good morning to people they know, but also to ultimate strangers. Why do they do that? Because it's a remembrance that ipsity is coterminous with sociality. One's selfhood, being alone, goes together with being with others. One is solitary and solidary at one and the same time. And that solitary and solidariness I learned from my grandmother, who was from the Dominican Republic. She said, whenever you say good morning to someone, or buenos dias, you're not only saying buenos dias to that person, you're saying buenos dias to life, to the gifting of life. Now, what is the gifting of life? It is the recognition that all of the processes around you are working together in a kind of harmony, in a kind of musicality, and together they are constructing life. You are part of that. And since you are part of that, you owe it to others. Now, I would like to begin, because my presentation today is for the NWO project or program called Islanders at the Helm. I am the chair of that NWO research program. I have conceived the program together with Corinne Hoffman, who's a professor of archaeology at the University of Leiden, and Professor Antonio Carmona Baez, who is the president of the University of St. Martin. So again, it is me and others. Again, that question of sociality. And what is Islanders at the Helm supposed to do? It is supposed to actually do a critical intervention in the ways that we are upsetting the life processes to the peril of people who live in the Dutch Caribbean islands of Aruba, Curaçao, Bonaire, St. Martin, St. Eustatius, and Saba. These islands are experiencing detrimental hurricanes, excessive rainfall, long periods of droughts. You see that cruise lines come and they treat the islands as garbage dumps. All of this is part of the Anthropocene. Now, the Anthropocene is just a fancy word for the human hand upsetting the processes of life. That's what the Anthropocene means. And you have to ask yourself, which human hand are we talking about? And the human hand that we're talking about are people of particular classes who live in all parts of the globe, but disproportionately in the North Atlantic. And at this moment in time, we see China and India are following suit. That's what the Anthropocene is about. Now, people who live on the 6 Caribbean islands do not emit so much, but they face the consequences of the Anthropocene. Now, let me offer a brief summary of the conceptual thought behind Islanders at the Helm. So what is the thinking behind what you will read as the project? It starts first with recognizing the catastrophic, the catastrophe that was colonialism, slavery, and imperialism in the Caribbean. It was a time of genocide. Many of the Amerindians, the first comers as we call it, they died, or they were enslaved and they died because of hard labor. Then you got the people from Africa who came through the Middle Passage. Then you also got people with contract labor from Europe, and at one and the same time, whilst human to human oppression and injustice was taking place, there was also a raping of the lands. These islands had to become factories, plantations, and what you saw was that much of the vegetation and the other type of life, the critter life, they also died up, and you got a new vegetation on this land. That transformed these islands. If you think about all of the wood that was burned in the 1500s to the 1800s, then we're talking about the start, a kind of commencement of the Anthropocene. That is what these islands experienced. That was the challenge. That was the catastrophe. And Vernon Chatlein, who is part of me, part of doing this presentation with me, he is now offering a tune that goes with that catastrophic. So please have a listen.
Donu donu kani umbate umiyu akimeno tamitera wama akina tere yoboku chamba akina tere yoboku chamba akimeno tamitera wama amize wana waze You
heard the lamentation that went with that cow horn. The cow horn was used when there was funerals. People died, when people felt the blues, and they had to find a way of purifying the blues. But you need to remember as well that whenever you have a catastrophe, something catastrophic, what happens at one and the same time is that there's a summoning. It becomes a challenge. It's a summoning to act. So people in the Caribbean had to act. The arrivants that arrived from Africa and Europe had to act. The first comers that arrived a bit earlier, the Arawak and the other Indians, the Kaikitios, the Tainos and so forth, they had to act. Now, how are you going to act in relation to a challenge? The people who came from Europe, who were also poor, had to act. Together they had to do something. They wanted a different kind of community. Now you will hear later on from a musicologist who's also part of this, Charissa, Granger, that in the beginning was the sound.
In the beginning there were no words. Toni Morrison tells us, in the beginning there was the sound, and they all knew what that sound sounded like. Morrison describes the voices of women searching for the right combination, the key, the code, the sound that brought the backs of words. In singing, in this sonic search, these women sought to grapple with the returned spirit of slavery, with the histories returned, with catastrophe. In doing so, they were building voices upon voices upon voices until they found it, the right song to relieve the possession of the murdered baby returned, the possession of histories returned. And when they did find that sound, it was a wave of sound wide enough to sound deep water and knock the pods of chestnut trees. And in it, in this sound, we trembled like the baptized in the wash. Morrison's subversion of John, the first verse, the first chapter, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, is suggestive of the importance and possibilities of music in how we practice imagining, practice freedom, care, a love ethic, and are able thereby to imagine and create a more livable, more possible world. There is attainment in the beauty we create in music. Saidiya Hartman reminds us that practicing beauty is a political act, that the search for beauty is political. Beauty is not a luxury, according to Hartman. Rather, it is a way of creating possibility in a space of enclosure, a radical act of subsistence, an embrace of our terribleness, a transfiguration of the given. It is a will to adorn, the love of too much. This beauty manifests in how we gather and what is imminent at such gatherings. The self is multiple when we gather in music, bound up with the sound of Shadow's bass man that does not allow sleep. is something inside of me, a bass sound, a choppy sound, a conch sound, a metal sound. It is vibration, bound up with spirits, again, shadows, jambi, animated in such a way that the distance between self and other is not only shortened, but complicated, porous, blurred, and opaque. It is what Stevie Wonder sings about, until the day that you are me and I am you, always, a sonic relationality. Music's many important values such as self-authorship, self-definition, to self-determine, giving meaning to multiple lived realities, preventing us from living in communities devoid of pleasure, of the erotics, the uses of which Lord teaches us is political, lacking intimacy and love, vacuous, single beings. In music, we can embrace the catastrophic lyrically. Simultaneously, we can overcome it, transgress the disaster sonically and rhythmically, melodically, harmonically, in the beat and the syncopation. An invitation to dance it out, to prance it out, to swing the thing, a call to keep jamming, following the philosophies of Black Stallion, Shadow, Calypso Rose, and Singing Sandra, a Kaiso aesthetic to take seriously. Also, the philosophies of plantation workers who use the end of garden tools, a hoe, to make a sound to keep themselves then and now whole, intact. Chappie, a break drum, the steel pan. Sylvia Winter offers us practices of art as sites where a re-enchanted human can be realized, thereby undoing the overrepresentation of man. I have felt re-enchantment in panyards, in dance halls, in juves, throughout the Caribbean. I take it with me, an embodied knowledge, comprised of joy, love, and knowing of pleasure. This feeling is an invitation to question the place of art, music, and performance practice in discussions of climate change, the exploitation of life, and the impact of livability, the extraction of natural resources, and the effect of all the above. Anthony Bogues offers that the work of the imagination operates as critical thought. It imagines and breaks the boundaries, the horizons of the status quo of every day. It produces new thought and desires. Bound up with music is a practice of imagining. In musicality, there is critique. What is Shadow's bouncy bass doing? The repetition, the antiphony, the jam section. What can music offer such discussions of climate change and its effects? Can it reveal something anew? Can it help us to think climate change anew? There is knowledge in music practice and embodied knowledge that emerges from feeling and sensing each other as part of ourselves. Studying and performing Caribbean music offers so much to how we think about livingness, humaning, different ways of being in the world, freedom practices, sovereignty, and multiple philosophies of love. Music beckons us to think such ongoing discussions in the humanities anew. Music is a site where our livingness is practiced and where the knowledge of this livingness, this humaning, takes place. Toni Morrison says that the search for the beloved, the part of the self that is you and loves you and is always there for you. For me, this occurs in music.
So they had to construct a new language. And in the Caribbean, in the Dutch Caribbean, we know the le. We know the la 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 le la 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 la. All of that is just sound, but it's a sweet sound that people did when they were being worked to death. Whilst being worked to death, they used the instruments of labor to become instruments of art. So you had work, which is labor, and you had work, which was art. So the same hoe that they used to dig in the ground, the chapi, was the same hoe they used to produce a devastating sound, a sound that uplifted their spirits, a sound in which they started to say, you know something, we must forget those differences we had in the old worlds and let's construct something new. They learned to also mourn the countries they came from in Africa, or mourn that things had changed with the Amerindians, and they learned to love the land. Now, one thing that we have not forgotten in Islanders at the Helm is to presuppose a kind of binary in which Europe is all bad and the Amerindians were all good, or the Africans were all good. We recognize, in looking at climate change and looking at colonialism, that you cannot presuppose that you had a paradise lost. You have to presuppose that there were struggles and there were disagreements all internally. But they took up that challenge in various ways. Once you have a challenge, meeting a catastrophe or being born from a catastrophe, that can breed or give life to an ethics of a call, an open call, a recognition of the callings. One of those recognitions is the recognition of the missing, the call of the missing. And you see in the Dutch Caribbean, but throughout the wider Caribbean, that no one has forgotten the call of the Amerindians, the first comers, not the autochthones, not the indigenous, but the first comers, because Islanders at the Helm presupposes that there are no autochthones. Everyone came from elsewhere. Some came earlier to the Caribbean than others. The first comers came earlier. Many of them died out. So that calling of the missing is what you see, for instance, at an island like Aruba is an Amerindian word. But an island like St. Martin, people still say, my island is St. Martin, but they also say my island is called Swaliga. And when they say Swaliga, that's a Carib Indian name. That's a recognition of those missings. There's also a recognition of all those who fell off the boats during the Missile Passage, all those who died on the plantations. That missing is always remembered as well in everything that people in the Dutch Caribbean do. But a call is not only a call of the past, it's also a call of the future. It's also that people in the Dutch Caribbean, in multiple ways, are constantly busy thinking about their offspring and saying, how do I work hard so that those to come will actually live in a better place? That's a recognition of those that are not there right now, but you still are working towards them. Now, the moment you have the past with people and the future with people to come, there's a third way of calling. That's how are you going to journey to both? A journey that goes to the past and goes to the future at one and the same time. People in the Caribbean, when we were beginning this research program, said, you should name this research program Islanders at the Helm. That was a term that came up on St. Martin. And what they were doing intuitively was remembering the technology that gave birth to the Caribbean. That technology were ships. All the peoples who came to the Caribbean came with ships. Many of them did not choose to come, or they came because they couldn't do otherwise, but they all came with ships. When people learned to love their islands, they said, this island here is a ship. St. Martin is a ship. Curaçao is a ship. Aruba is a ship. And on these ships, we are connected to the wider world. We're connected because the sea is relation. We are connected to the larger Dutch kingdom. There are at least 1/3 to half of the Antillians living permanently in the Netherlands. That's a strong connection. Constitutionally, we are part of the Dutch kingdom. That's one of the connections. But the other connection of the sea is the connection to the wider islands in the region. So I'm going to end now by saying that Islanders at the Helm is a multidisciplinary program. And that multidisciplinary program, you will have archaeologists, anthropologists, cultural musicologists, people who do performance studies, people who do heritage studies, technical sciences, all of them together trying to understand and trying to contribute so that the islanders on their ships, which are the 6 islands, so that they can sail into a much brighter future. Thank you.